I'm Connor and welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 of the 2010s. And this week we're starting once again a new list, the Top 10 overlooked / underappreciated movies of the decade. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about some of my favorite movies of the decade through these lists, whether it be the top 10 action movies of the decade or sci-fi fantasy. We're down into the different types of, not genres, but different types of just lists. We've done soundtracks, we've done performances, so I hope you've been enjoying these sort of sub-genres within the actual series. I know I've been having a bunch of fun, but essentially how the breakdown always works is I give my picks from 10 to 7, including 5 honorable mentions in 1 week. The next week will be my pick from 6 to 2 on the top 10 list, and then finally one single video of my number 1 fantasy movie of the decade, or in this case in a couple of weeks it's going to be the most underappreciated / overlooked movie of the decade. Now, I specifically didn't use the word underrated because I think that word just means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You know, some people will say something like The Nice Guys is underrated, but that was critically loved, and I think everyone that's actually seen that movie really enjoys it. So is that a movie that's underrated, even though it sort of has a kind of cult status? Is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World underrated? These are all movies that I like, but I actually wouldn't consider them underrated, but some people may. So I use instead the terms overlooked / underappreciated. Overlooked meaning that either not enough people saw it, it did poorly at the box office, or it just maybe wasn't even reviewed, and that for some reason the film community and then the larger community at large did not see the movie. And then I also talk about my underappreciated. So it's either overlooked or it's underappreciated. Underappreciated meaning just maybe it has a poor Rotten Tomatoes score, didn't get a lot of box office, or the general fan appreciation wasn't there, or maybe it was sort of somewhat appreciated, has a pretty good critical score, but it wasn't in the top 10 best of the year list like maybe I thought it should have been. So those are my sort of definitions, the clarifications of the list. I've sort of divided it based on different types that maybe will explain a little bit better. There are some movies that here they're just forgotten Oscar films in the sense that they had Oscar campaigns and didn't pan out. There are some just movie star misfires accordingly to some people, where if you look at someone like Brad Pitt's career, you'd say, oh, really, this movie? It's one of the ones that I really appreciate. Then there's just unknown movies that no one's really seen. And then there's just some underlooked movies from great directors that maybe the director is known, but it's one that's not as well appreciated within this decade. Yes, so a couple of them are coming up this list as well. But without further ado, it's going to be a long episode as always, as these always are. So I just want to jump into my honorable mentions, with my first one being American Animals. A unique blend of documentary, docudrama, sort of blending the lines between truth and fiction. Essentially, it is a documentary in terms of the director interviews the real life people, and then they're looking back, and we see through these played out sections, but they're not like something like The Thin Blue Line, where they're sort of just generic actors recreating this. That it's actually like a real movie in the sense you have great young talent and Evan Peters and Barry Keoghan and Blake Jenner, who are all terrific in acting out these situations. So it's a unique sort of blend, what I guess would call the movie version of a true crime documentary, but heightened because of that terrific acting, because of these scenarios that are played out about these 4 kids who decide to rob a rare book from a local library. And how I would describe it would be tense and exhausting, and would be like the last 20 minutes of Goodfellas stretched out to an entire movie. It's like a car wreck. It's just a terrible idea from the beginning. You know it is. You know it's not going to go wrong, partly because you see the documentary aspect, but just the sort of vibe and the nature and the plan of how these guys go about things. You know it's not going to go right. So when we see it, it's just sort of like a train wreck or a car wreck. You can't turn away even though you know what's going to eventually happen. It's not like something like Ocean's 11. It's the opposite of Ocean's 11, where they're not slick, they're not even smart, they barely even have a plan, and they're just doing it sort of on a whim, and sort of that opportunism and seeing a shortcut to the top that attracts so many people. I think they're interested in. I think the movie also does an interesting job, very much referencing past films or heist television, to sort of influence the actual people, the real life people, that these real life guys were influenced by some of the movies that they've seen and thought it would be so easy because they actually prepare for this job by watching heist movies, even though they're sort of way in over their head, and the realities come in. That it's not a movie like something like Ocean's 11, that the realities and the stumbling blocks come in, and then they realize that they really are in over their head, despite how easy the job they think it is. And it's a exhausting film because it is not long, but just because it's a train wreck, you know what's going to happen. You're just sort of watching it happen. You know, these guys get sort of sucked in by a charismatic leader and sort of just wing it on the fly, but it's incredibly enticing, always engaging, and it's a movie that I recommend to a lot of people because of that sort of true crime documentary style that so many people like on television has been morphed into a movie style in a very sort of unique way while still referencing some previous heist movies. It's very good. It was underseen and underappreciated for sure. Check out American Animals. Then my next pick is A Bigger Splash. I talked about the movie briefly a couple weeks ago when I talked about Ralph Fiennes as an honorable mention for his performance in A Big Splash, which he's terrific in, and he's a large reason why I like the movie, because for a movie that doesn't really have things happening necessarily, he makes incredibly your eyes glued to the screen and always engaged because you don't know what he's going to do next. It's unpredictability. But that's not to say that the other performances aren't just as terrific. Tilda Swinton is great as a rock star who is losing her voice, or potentially could lose it forever, so she barely speaks. Dakota Johnson shows up, and Matthias Schoenaerts. They're all really terrific in it, in a performance-driven movie that has just terrific characters. On the page, they're really well written, but the performances really add to everything and add to some of the brewing tension and past frustrations and just general, even sexual tension that's occurring within the film, and some things that are not being spoken about, but are sort of spoken about within their body language, even though the dialogue is sort of traditionally polite. And the characters are very well written. I talked about how Ralph Fiennes' character is a guy that you know. I think a lot of the characters are like that as well. But also Luca Guadagnino, the director, really elevates it in terms of the feel of the movie, that this feels in a way detached because they're these rich guys who are living in Italy on a vacation and sort of just being by themselves. It feels like they're not in the real world, and then they can sort of get away with some of these things. So there's a detachedness to their lifestyle, but also a real sort of tangibility that you feel like you feel like you're beside them in the Italian countryside, and it has sort of an almost inexplicable, alluring kind of a quality to it. There are some sexual tension and past frustrations that are building up within the surface. The setting is really well defined, and you feel like you're there in terms of the relaxed, blasé, no consequences lifestyle, and that adds to some of even more the mystery that occurs later on in the film. But a performance-driven movie with a great setting that is really enticing, almost in an inexplicable way. The only reason I didn't put it on this list is because it's from Luca Guadagnino, whose next film was Call Me By Your Name. So I think this movie got a lot of retrospective viewings, and I think will as he sort of expands within his directing career, because he's more of a household name as we go along. But I still think A Bigger Splash from 2015 didn't get any awards buzz, not even for Ralph Fiennes. I think that was sort of underappreciated, definitely for its time at the very least. Then my next pick is A Most Violent Year. This is from director J.C. Chandor, who had a great decade that I think people have sort of forgotten about. He was sort of this touted talent, but then turned maybe in a different direction than people want him to, but a direction I really loved. So he started off the decade with Margin Call, and then in 2013 did All Is Lost with Robert Redford, and then 2014 this, and then in 2019 Triple Frontier. So I think he had a really terrific decade, and I love all of those movies. But A Most Violent Year may be my favorite, because while all of his films I think have a magnetic quality to them, I think he's able to get inside the heads of his protagonists better than most directors of this decade. And I think that's particularly true with Oscar Isaac's character here in this movie. That the way, especially how Oscar Isaac gets his performance, may be one of his best of the decade. I think Ex Machina is pretty terrific too. He's a great actor, but I think he brings an element of stoicism, of calmness, of confidence, but of an energy and a prose that commands the room. He's a guy that, while not directly communicated, definitely explicitly told through his body language and the way he conducts himself. A guy who's had a past, a troubled past, who really worked hard to get here. That he's a guy who has built this. It's really a business movie. He's built this business. He's gotten to this fortunate place with his family, and he's did it by himself, and he's a self-made man. So that when his business starts to crash around him, seemingly everything at once, this critical moment, it's a test of his morality, his ethics. And at the beginning, it's very much sort of a business type of movie, and then it turns into a morality play, into a guy that has to sort of salvage his life. Everything's happening to him at once. He has to sort of fix it all, and the ultimate test that he has to go through as a businessman and as just a man. It's a bleak movie. I think a lot of people thought it'd be a crime movie, but it's not. It's really kind of a business movie in the 80s with some crime elements, yes, but really a morality play, interested in ethics and what you have to push as well, sort of negotiations, and a terrific performance by Jessica Chastain as well, in terms of what you have to do to reach your goals, the American dream, at what cost. It's a theme that has been going on, but a theme that I think is always interesting, particularly in this time in America. It's always something that's interested me, and especially when you have a terrific performance and the sort of bleak, still kind of photography and directing by J.C. Chandor. It's really terrific and always engaging. Then my next honorable mention is A Prayer Before Dawn. This is about a story about an English boxer who gets put into a Thai prison. The English boxer's name is Billy Moore, and while this could have been a traditional sort of biopic or Rocky kind of training type with a linear story, it's a very interesting movie. It's very French or European in the sense that it's almost experimental. There's very little dialogue in the first, really throughout the entire movie, but the first half has almost no dialogue. Well, there's a lot of Thai men screaming at Billy Moore, but there's no subtitles, so we don't get that sort of in-person kind of experience. So I say experimental because the director uses these sort of tight close-ups and long takes, quick cutting, to make you sort of feel like you're in the movie, that it's experimental, but more importantly, it's experiential, that you really feel like you're just thrown into the scenario, that it's claustrophobic, it's loud, you don't know what's happening, and you really are being put into the shoes of Billy Moore. And it stays like that for most of the movie, that there's never a real clear communication, and oftentimes that lack of communication is either through mind tricks, purposeful, through some of the Thai sort of head honcho prison guys within there. They all sleep in the same sort of room, so there's always an alertness that you have going on. And then as we sort of go throughout the story, we learn a little bit more why he's been put in here, heroin addiction, some past trauma with his father, maybe turned him to a boxer or turned him to this lifestyle, and but in more sort of non-linear, non-traditional kind of a way. So while he's battling, just surviving in this prison, also realizing how he got here and how boxing may be his only way out, and really sort of diving into that instead of being sort of compelled and drawn to some of the addiction problems he has. But so like I said, while this could be a really traditional biopic and it would have been sort of boring, why it's on this movie is because it's an A24 movie that I think no one's really talked about. It's a great action movie, really, and a great sort of intense drama that is told in a very unique way. It's told in a way that's incredibly personal and feels like you're in there, feels like a virtual reality almost kind of experience. And Billy Moore is a great sort of conduit for being that way, while still telling his story. It's less traditional, it's less linear, but it's ultimately way more rewarding for that. So if you want to see a great boxing type movie / Midnight Express from A24, a Celebrate independent distributor, check out A Prayer Before Dawn. Then my final honorable mention is going to be Waves, a movie that I really liked from last year, and a sort of classic honorable mention. A movie with high ambition that has some top tier stuff within it, even though some parts are not the best compared to some of the other consistency of the other movies. But that being said, I really liked the movie. It was one of my top 10 movies of last year, and I talked about it in the Connors episode. Overall, it's a movie from director Trey Edward Schultz, who, this is another A24 movie, and his movies have also been A24 movies. So in a way, kind of a touted A24 independent director, like in the likes of Robert Eggers or Ari Aster, but maybe with a little bit more of a mixed reception because of this movie wasn't as well received. It sort of had some Oscar buzz and then didn't really get anything. And then also, he had some bad reputation from It Comes at Night, a horror movie that is very mixed on some people, but especially for something like Waves, I really appreciate that. Even if it is mixed or divisive, we'll call it, I'm on the pro side, that I think the first half and the second half are two completely different movies, and I like that. And I think both works. The first part is the sort of overflowing kettle pot right to sort of a total climax, and it's tense and it's exciting and kind of thrilling, but really nerve-wracking as well. Kind of like Uncut Gems in terms of its ability to build tension and show that Trey Richards is an incredible manipulator as a director, and I think that's a total positive in that sense. But that being said, the second half is very much dreamy. It's losslessness after sort of we'll call it the first half climax of the movie. And once that happens, and the second half is so sort of the echoes of that event, that it's an event that's so traumatic and so impactful, that what does the family look like afterwards? And that's what the movie's about, really, just sort of an emotional, honest journey about an American family living in Florida, and sort of the pressures that occur. And I think also what's great about the movie is that it's an emotional epic in the sense that we see the dynamics of different relationships, whether it be sort of the wife and the husband, or the father and the daughter, or father and the son, and sort of how there's different ways we treat other people, and this sort of emotional honesty and sort of confronting these hard to talk about discussions, I thought were really well done. And the first half is really intense and great, and the second half is kind of lost, but I think lost in a good way, because you don't really know where that is to go. Trey Richards clearly has some sort of Terrence Malick influences, and I really appreciated that. It's sort of a stunning movie with a terrific soundtrack that I kept on thinking about the images. It's a real gorgeous movie, and I kept on thinking about the images long after, and some of the themes and some of the emotional cruxes and things and themes that it's trying to confront. I just kept on sort of thinking about. So it's a movie that I think had Oscar buzz, but because it didn't have Oscar buzz, some people say, oh yeah, it wasn't that good, I'm not going to check it out, especially during the Oscar season when there's so many great movies to check out. Some people may not even seen Waves, so if you haven't seen Waves, definitely check it out. It's terrific and definitely worth a watch. Then my number 10 pick is World War Z.
Tell the kids I'm coming back. Just, I'm coming back.
A movie I did include in my top 10 action movies of the decade list because I wanted to talk about it here. A movie that I think everyone thought was going to be bad, even the studio when it sort of first came out, because it had a notoriously long schedule, delayed a year, budget sort of inflated, not really based off a superhero property, betting a lot of money on this, but it paid off with the success of $540 million at the box office, and even the critical reviews were either mixed to positive, that everyone thought it would be a disaster, and then when they saw it, they were like, oh, this is actually pretty good. But for me, I think it's better than that. I think I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed it, and I think for me it's the ultimate blockbuster. And a movie that at 2013 I thought it was the height of zombie movies, I'd be so sick of them, and then did something different, did something interesting, sort of a different evolution of the genre. That so much of the zombies, they had to be slow, but these ones are fast, they run fast. It's a simple thing, but I think really effective and done well here, especially the numbers. The zombies have always been scary because of how many they are, but when it's a world war thing, when it's the entire world that has zombies, and you must have seen maybe in the trailer when they sort of climb on top of each other over a wall, I think that sort of idea of a scary, unstoppable, fast force that is coming towards you is just a totally scary wave. And I think it's kind of a great international globe-trotting movie. I mean, this used to be, with the release of Tenet a couple weeks ago now, and this used to be sort of a normal thing, but nowadays we barely even see movies and action movies like this, and if they are, they're on Netflix with a movie like Six Underground. Most of the big blockbusters are IP driven, so while this is based on a book, it was just, I guess, maybe refreshing to see at the time such a movie that is committed to the blockbuster kind of a style and format and international spy kind of globe-trotting, while still being kind of inventive and a different change on the zombie genre. While also being a zombie movie, because of the international scale, it's almost like a disaster movie. And it really is an international movie. I mean, our hero, Brad Pitt, is a former UN employee and is sort of tasked in saving the world. And He's a guy with a strong sort of family connection, so you have that emotional core, but for the most part you're here for the action and for the set pieces and for the great sort of action sequences, which this does have. And I think that I do want to be clear, as much as this sort of inventive, this is still a thrill ride. This is the amusement park blockbuster kind of a summer movie that is a type of movie that I enjoy, and I think for this it was very successful in that. The pace of the movie is quick, it never lags, there's always a new location or a new action piece, set piece to keep you engaged, and you're never bored, it's always moving. We feel the sort of time ticking clock of things like we have to get the virus, we have to sort of get the vaccine out, we have to sort of stop things. The sort of rush and the panic really lasts throughout the movie. There's some great sort of smaller set pieces, which are just thriller and masterclasses in tension, trying to get certain vials from the lab, being sort of like a stealth stuff like in a video game. There's also great large CGI filled action sequences, but they're clear, they're well done in terms of the visual effects, and have that sort of boots on the ground kind of a feeling of panic and scariness. And then when you get that sort of helicopter view, it's just massive. It's exactly what I want from a summer blockbuster, a sort of strong, sort of basic maybe, but emotional core of the movie, with a solid charismatic lead, international globe-trotting, also with this sort of terrific different type. You know, this is zombies, but they run fast, and just great set pieces that are always moving, you're always engaged. And it's a movie that I've always sort of thought about and been drawn back to for that sort of Saturday night movie. So if you want sort of a great blockbuster that was maybe seen as trashy, I think you'd be very, very surprised at how well actually World War Z is done, and you should check it out. And then my number 9 pick on this list is going to be The Standoff at Sparrow Creek.
There. Do you get it? If we don't pin this on one person to something that's not there, a lot of people are going to die.
How do we know it's not you?
You're hiding something. What is it?
For this list, I really tried to prioritize movies that really not a lot of people have seen, and so some movies that either went straight to video on demand or movies that weren't even just talked about in the general sense. And I think that Standoff at Sparrow Creek is definitely one of them. It wasn't a Hollywood movie that was really released in theaters, straight to video on demand, but found a passionate fan base, including myself, who really appreciated this sort of first-time directorial debut indie feature. It doesn't have any stars. It has a bunch of those guys or that guys, like you'd see him in a movie and you go, oh yeah, it's that guy. You have James Badge Dale and Patrick Fischler and Gene Jones and a lot of these guys that you would recognize really throughout the entire ensemble. But it's a great movie because it gives them the chance to shine, and they're really terrific. The entire movie, while not having sort of a singular lead, it'd be James Badge Dale if it was anyone, but for the most part, it's all these guys in terms of a terrific ensemble. About a militia group who gathers together after they find out that a militia member has caused a mass shooting at a police funeral. So they're trying to figure out who of them did it, because if one of them doesn't confess, they're all going to get, probably put in jail or accused or have their lives ruined. So they're trying to do the interrogation before the police can get to them. A movie with great performances, but even better dialogue with shifting power dynamics, and this is a total sort of masculine machismo tricks in terms of its dialogue, in terms of mind tricks and power dynamics, and saying one thing but meaning something else, and all through a sort of dialogue and trying to understand and try to figure out who did it, and sort of in terms of an Agatha Christie sort of mystery kind of a way, but in an intense way. I mean, this is David Mamet-esque hard-boiled crime dialogue that is done very seriously and very intently, but very intelligently. It's like one long interrogation scene within this warehouse as we sort of learn more about the past and some of the dynamics and how that shifts throughout the movie and how we think one thing and think something else. It really is great at keeping and building that tension and making you think it's one person basing on how they're acting, but realizing it's maybe someone else and not really knowing until the very end. And I think for a lot of independent movies or first-time features, a lot of people think that an independent movie has to look sort of bland or stale. But I actually think that's not true, especially when you see a movie like this, because the lighting and the composition of this film is unparalleled. The confidence of the director Henry Dunham, who's able to hold in these wides and these sort of still shots and allow them to play out, have his characters cloaked in sort of total blackness and darkness, have great lighting in terms of these almost impressionistic kind of beams of light that streak through the warehouse it's totally different, and it's not sort of the boring way, especially with the great dialogue and a great story that it has here, and a different sort of perspective that is very interesting and refresh. It's a great script, but also adding on top of that, the visual flair is so terrific. Then you get those guys who get a chance to shine and deliver this dialogue with a terrific performance and terrific sort of seriousness that it works well within this story. All those adding up together really work well for this story and really work and add to its appeal. It's a movie with a clear vision and feels like it could have been made in the 70s, but I'm glad it was made now, and a movie with a clear vision, and this is definitely a director to watch because of how well done in all aspects this movie was, and a movie that not a lot of people have seen because it didn't really have those stars. But definitely check out the Standoff at Sparrow Creek. It's for a sort of hard-boiled crime, tense interrogation kind of a movie, whodunit in a way, really terrific. Standoff at Sparrow Creek, check it out. Then my number 8 pick is Logan Lucky.
You Logans mustn't be as simple-minded as people say.
People say that.
From Oscar-winning director Steven Soderbergh, who maybe is the most underappreciated director in Hollywood. He's an Oscar winner, he's made some stone-cold classics, yet for some reason in this decade, despite making 9 movies and a TV series, none of them has really had this sort of terrific, great Oscar series and Oscar kind of buzz. But despite them all being terrific, whether it be Haywire in 2011, Behind the Candelabra in 2013, he made 9 movies total, and The Nick, the series, and The Mosaic. So he's a guy who always works a lot, and I think we maybe take him a little bit too much for granted because he makes a movie, or sometimes 2, every year. But that doesn't mean his movies aren't done with sort of intense, great direction, great skill, but also a seriousness and a great attention to detail that I think some people may sort of, because they get it every year, they think it's not Stanley Kubrick and it's not perfectionist. That's not to say they're not really terrific and really engaging. And ultimately, I went with Logan Lucky because it's my favorite of the decade, but I could have easily gone with something like Haywire or Behind the Candelabra or even Contagion, which is very relevant now. But Logan Lucky, this is from the director of the Ocean's trilogy, so Logan Lucky fits well within those sort of caper heist movies, but it's the total success of the movie, and this guy is clearly the king of them and making them. About a family from West Virginia who decides to rob a NASCAR stadium during a race in North Carolina. And it's the perfect blend for a great movie of humor, suspense, revelation, and just a strong emotional drama to it. This guy, Steven Soderbergh, is the king because the script written by his wife, Jules Asner, who is terrific at really building a great script, and he's great at just knowing the pace of the movie. That so much of these heist movies are so much about pace and editing and how we sort of are told and revealed the story beats. But where something like Ocean's 11, we're sort of told the plan and then we watch them execute the plan. This is a little bit different because not only is it sort of the southern hillbilly kind of an Ocean's 11, it doesn't have sort of the slickness that you would maybe traditionally find with the suit wearing in Las Vegas, but definitely has that style. And it is great at having that pace, but it doesn't actually tell us the plan, that there is no a plan of what's going to happen, that we just sort of watch it happen and then sort of learn more about it as it's actually happening. So it adds to the tension, but also keeps us engaged because we're like, wait, how are they actually going to do this? That we're not told the plan until they actually execute the crime. Now, it's got an incredible ensemble cast with everybody from Hilary Swank to Channing Tatum, but the main 4 are Channing Tatum, Riley Keough, Adam Driver, and Daniel Craig. And Daniel Craig was a 2017 Connors, my award show nominee. You can check out that video. But that's a movie that I really that's a performance I really liked, and I think he's just such a weird kind of a guy. He does a southern accent, he did it in Knives Out, but in this, he's got bleached hair, and he's definitely leaning into the weirdness and the sort of unpredictability. I mean, his name's Joe Bang, because he's good at explosives, and has a few scenes with them, that too. So before it even happens, we understand some of the funny, the humorous elements. It's great, like I said, the editing, the pace, the rhythm of how just the shots are set up and it followed through. I also think, though, the movie has a great humor to it, that it's very funny, but these things would just make it, oh, it's like Ocean's 11, but the sort of hillbilly version of it, and it's good for that. But this actually has a much stronger emotional core than Ocean's 11, which is why I maybe like it a little bit better than those movies. That it's actually less of an ensemble, and a little bit more focused on this Logan family, being the sister Riley Keough and then the two brothers, Adam Driver and Channing Tatum. But Channing Tatum, particularly his relationship with his ex-wife and her new husband, and then their daughter that they have together, that there is a strong emotional connection between that sort of father-daughter relationship between Channing Tatum and his daughter. That there's a reason, sort of a moralistic reason, why we understand, sort of connect with this character. And you know, even one of the Jack Quaid and his buddy there, Daniel Craig's character's brothers in the movie, they always sort of make a fun of that, of the moralistic reason. But there actually is sort of a moralistic reason why we care for these characters and don't really care that they're robbing this sort of big corporation, especially of how it sort of ends up at the end. So if you're looking for a terrific, great time at the movie theaters, it's just fun, funny, actually has a strong emotional core, terrific acting, and just a fast-paced kind of a story that keeps you always engaged and rewards multiple rewatches. Check out Logan Lucky and keep this as a PSA. We need to stop underappreciating Steven Soderbergh, because he's one of the best directors out there, and he's had a terrific decade, and we still need to appreciate his movies, whether it be The Laundromat or High Flying Bird or Side Effects. He's done some great movies this decade, and we need to appreciate them. So Logan Lucky, check it out if you haven't. Then my number 7 pick is Born to be Blue.
But, what? It's not your playing that I'm worried about.
Miles said come back once you lived a little. I lived a little.
I want to play. All I want to do is play.
I want my life back.
A movie I saw out of the blue, pardon the pun. A movie that I would have probably had seen on TV, and this kind of falls into the scenario, you know, if this was 20 years ago, it was a movie that, oh, I just caught it on TV, you know, it was actually pretty good, you should check it out. But in this case, I was looking through Netflix, I saw it, I said, hey, why not? And I threw it on, and I really enjoyed it. So it's that sort of self-discovery that I appreciate, that you won't maybe even find Born to be Blue on any other list, because it's a movie that I really appreciate, and I sort of found and feels like kind of my own, which in a way sort of builds some of the cult status of these type of movies. But Born to be Blue doesn't have a cult fan base. I think it's sort of been forgotten. But it's a movie about the legendary jazz musician Chet Baker, played by Ethan Hawke, who has more recently been playing a lot of sort of real life figures, but this was sort of near his beginning of that sort of fascination, and is really great at that. And I knew nothing about jazz or Chet Baker before that, and really sort of became much more interested in jazz and Chet Baker and Miles Davis and Dizzy Gillespie and all these guys that are in the film because of this movie, which I think is some of the highest compliments you can really give to a movie, because it made me interested not only within the movie, but within the subject matters and their works within the movie. And Ethan Hawke is really sort of the central performance and reason why maybe you'd watch this movie. That it's a lot of it is on his performance, and his performance as Chet Baker. Maybe if you're a big jazz guy, you would know what Chet's life is, but he has a really fascinating life. And instead of doing it the traditional biopic where you from birth to death, it focuses on sort of a particular point in this life. That on one hand, it's sort of criticizing and making fun of some of these biopics, while also being sort of a traditional great biopic and telling us more about the type of person this guy is through this small sort of critical moment in his life where he gets he's suffering from heroin addiction and has debts all over town, and then because of that gets his teeth knocked out. So he has no teeth, he has to get new dentures in, and as a jazz musician, as a trumpeter, that's devastating. So he has to sort of go away with this woman that he meets, played by Carmen Jogo, who's also terrific. And at the beginning, it's sort of like the Chet Baker story, and Ethan Hawke plays him sort of depressed and blue and sort of very gaunt and heroin addicted, but not sort of too over the top, sort of just spaced out. But then when he goes and has to sort of recover, the film transitions and becomes very much a romance film between these two. But still, especially in the second half of the movie, and as we sort of go back, when he sort of starts to make more and more success in his rehab and his recovery, some of the past starts to creep up. So we see this sort of complexity within his performance, that we see where he is, and he's gaunt and he's spaced out, and then when he starts to come back and it's a little bit more clear, he starts to learn more and is gaining more with his new dentures in the trumpet, but also the way Ethan Hawke plays him is there's sort of a self-doubt and an unsureness that he needs heroin to play the trumpet, so playing it without it feels like something is missing, that there is some sort of struggle. On top of that, you know, when he goes away, he goes to some sort of farm area and meets this new girl and sort of has that relationship there. But then when he goes back, he sort of falls into the self-destructive nature of his past and meeting some of his old sort of bad friends and sort of that pressure that overcomes him. And that's sort of the real challenge. On top of that, the sort of frustrations of him being not as good as a jazz player at the beginning, and then when he gets to a point when he is somewhat good, he still thinks he needs the heroin or needs an extra little thing to make him play better. That actually adds to him, and sort of that sort of musician's dilemma that occurs with so many still occurred in the 40s and still occurs today. That idea that I need this drug to be good and I can't play without it. There's sort of a safety net. So terrific structure and a really fascinating, interesting character played well by Ethan Hawke. I think a performance like this or something like Predestination, when he came out with First Reformed and people were saying, oh, he's going to get an Oscar nomination, it was because people had sort of not seen these kinds of movies. But he's been doing this entire decade, and this personally may be one of my favorites. First Reformed is really terrific too, but he's really great as Chet Baker, becoming really a transformative kind of performance and a complex character that plays different things, that he is romantic and he is charming, but he can be frustrating and perfectionist, but also sort of be spaced out on the heroin. And there's so much different range within Ethan Hawke's performance. And then even, I don't want to sort of undermine Carmen Ejogo, who's also terrific and plays off him very well and gives him sort of the hard edge. But ultimately, that the movie stuck with me for the very end. The sort of ending in the last sequence of the movie is pitch perfect and is the perfect way to end a movie. So just for the ending alone, you need to check out Born to be Blue, because it's perfect and just blew me away. And it's an ending that I watch on YouTube all the time because of just how amazing it is and how it sort of coalesces everything into the perfect end note. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you stay tuned to next week, where you see my picks from 6 to 2 on the overlooked / underappreciated movies of the decade. I'd love to know some of your picks of what movies that you really like, that you think is kind of underrated or overlooked or underappreciated, whatever you want. And I want you to know what you think of some of the movies I've put on this list. Have you seen something like Born to be Blue? Are you a fan of Logan Lucky like I am? Tell me in the comments down below. I'd love to hear that. And until next time, stay tuned.